We're going to have a little bit of a longer open for you today as we do one of my favorite exercises every offseason where we go position by position and rank the NFC East teams 1 through 4 at each spot. We'll include special teams and coaching in this as well. And then at the end, we'll see the total points for each team in the division, and we'll see where they rank. These are not meant to be scientific, but I think, Lance, it gives us a good way to kind of look at a basic gauge of overall talent on each one of these teams.
Well, plus there's been a lot of changes on various rosters too. So, things are not just carrying over from 2020. You have some different coaches in the mix, and I thought some of the teams in the division have done a nice job trying to plug in some of their holes and issues. So I think it's just a nice outlook of everything that has occurred really over the last few months as we get set for the start of training camp.
Yeah, it'd be a good way to kind of set us up for our opponent previews, which start next week, as we kind of look at each team in a little bit more detail as we get ready for the 2021 season. All right, Lance, Lance and I, by the way, will give our ratings today, and then I think it'll actually be me, Paul, and Fiegels will do our second set of ratings tomorrow. We'll have a guest on Thursday, and then no show on Friday for Juneteenth. So that's kind of where we are this week, everybody. So just to keep in mind, that's the programming schedule, and we are live every day at noon. So, Lance, let's look at quarterback first. And, look, I think the easy way to start here is that I think the Cowboys have to be the top team at quarterback with Dak Prescott returning. He seemed to be a full go in OTAs where the ankle wasn't even really an issue. So I think that's an easy one. It gets a little bit tougher when we start thinking about who number 2 in the division is.
Yeah, well, also, Dak has, I think, the most consistent resume, John, of all the quarterbacks. Meaning you know what you're going to get out of him, or at least you have a good idea because he's done it for multiple seasons, and he hasn't changed teams. He's still with the same organization, plus the offensive coordinator hasn't changed, despite the fact that you had a new head coach last season. So I think when you take all of that into consideration, I don't really think there's anything to debate. Dak Prescott, to me, is straight in front of this entire group in terms of who the top quarterback is.
Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky, right? Because, remember, this is simply a procedure that's judging potential performance in 2021. This has nothing to do with the future, who'd you rather have for the next 5 years. It's simply to see who would you rather have for one season. So then the question, I think, Jalen Hurts, I think we would agree, Lance, probably has the most to prove in this group, right?
I think that's probably the biggest question mark because there's just not much of a sample size.
I agree. So let's give the Eagles 1 point. They're in last in this category. But I think the Daniel Jones, Ryan Fitzpatrick conversation is interesting because the Dolphins last year in the 9 games Fitzpatrick started played well. But in those games, Fitzpatrick had just 13 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. All right, he averaged in those games 230 passing yards per game, which is fine. It's not spectacular. 95 quarterback rating, good. But it's not like, he's a very up-and-down quarterback. He can have good games and bad games. He has turnover issues the same way Daniel Jones does. So I could go either way here. If I'm anticipating and you wanted me to give you an honest answer, who do I think will have a better individual year this year? I think I would say Daniel Jones, but obviously Ryan Fitzpatrick has a, more of a history of being able to do it at the NFL level. Where would you rank these two? How do you look at it?
Yeah, I think this is a tough one because I really could go back and forth with each one of them. Fitzpatrick clearly has more experience than Daniel Jones, but Daniel Jones is now entering the second year with the same offensive coordinator. See, if it was a new coordinator again, I probably would easily go to the side of Ryan Fitzpatrick, but now Ryan's learning a new offense. But then again, he's done that all throughout the course of his career. And I think I've said this multiple times on the program. Ryan, to me, could have the 2015 season he had with the Jets because I really like the personnel that they have compiled on offense at the skilled positions around Ryan Fitzpatrick. And he's proven that when he's got some talent, he can let those guys do the heavy lifting. Then again, the Giants, I think, did the same thing with Daniel Jones, where they've given him a lot of good talent. Daniel Jones, Ryan Fitzpatrick, both mobile. They both can run, extend plays. I mean, there's a lot in terms of the check marks that you want to go through the list. I'll go slight edge to Daniel Jones here because he's the younger guy. There's a little bit more upside. You don't yet know what you have out of him, whereas Ryan Fitzpatrick, I think he clearly has reached his ceiling at this point, meaning you know how high he can go. Daniel Jones maybe has some room to branch out beyond that. So I'll give the edge, but I'm talking it's a very, very slight edge, John, for Daniel Jones.
I agree. I would have been willing to tie them at 2.5 each, but I agree. I think Fitzpatrick could also be on the downside, right? He's going to be 39 this year, and Jones is on the way up. So I'm with you. I agree. So let's put Daniel Jones at second here with 3 points. We'll put Washington at 2. And then Tyler Heineke, who knows? Maybe he at some point is going to earn his way onto the field. He played a heck of a playoff game in that first round of the division. And by the way, he wasn't bad in the second round either. They were just playing a team that was really good. So, anyway. So now they didn't get to the second round. But
they didn't get to the second round,
But in the second half of that game, his numbers went down, but I thought he still played pretty well. I mean, this is second half, not second
Well,
game.
remember, he played late in that game against Carolina in the regular season.
That's what I was thinking.
That was, I think, the game that you were referring to.
That's exactly the one I was referring to. Thank you. All right, let's go to running back here. And this I also think is pretty tough, Lance, because I think there are some concerns about Ezekiel Elliott, whether or not he's on a bit of a downside here. His number of explosive plays is way down. But Saquon Barkley, coming off of a knee injury, he's been injured 2 straight years. They have not announced a timetable. He declined to announce a timetable. There's news out of Dallas that Elliott's in the greatest shape of his life, blah, blah, blah. We've heard all that before. I don't take too much out of that. And then you throw in Antonio Gibson, who I think has shown some skills with Washington. And then you have the Miles Sanders and the rest of the crew in Philadelphia at running back. But I do think at the top here, we're deciding between Elliott and Barkley. And I think if both players are healthy coming off of a full-strength year, I think I'm tipping the cap to Barkley here. But I have trouble ranking him ahead of Elliott coming off of an ACL and some of the questions we have with where he is in his recovery.
Well, I'm also looking at, unless your interpretation is different than mine, John, I'm looking at the running back depth chart.
Oh, yeah, that too. That's a good point.
To take
Tony
into consideration.
Pollard's good. That's a really good point, Lance.
I'm not just looking at it who the starter is. I want to know if you lose your starter, what do you feel about the next guy? And most teams utilize multiple running backs, even if it's for a few carries. So
that's a great point. It's a great point.
I'm not so much looking at the top 4 guys that you laid out. I'm looking at who do I feel good about the group overall. And with Zeke, I'm also considering Tony Pollard, who sort of had his coming out party last season because he had a game where they actually allowed him to be the guy because Zeke was sidelined. Unfortunately, it didn't put me over the top in my fantasy game, but that's a whole other story that we'll revisit at a later time. But anyway, getting back to the point at hand here.
Feel free to revisit that anytime you want, by the way.
Well, it was a heartbreaking loss that I clearly have not recovered from.
I know. I didn't even bring it up. Jeez.
Yeah, well, it lasts with me for a good portion of the offseason. Take that seriously after you invest so much time in that. But anyway. So I consider Pollard. I also consider, for example, Washington has J.D. McKissick as well as Peyton Barber. And Philadelphia has Boston Scott playing behind Miles Sanders. The Giants, I know they brought in Devontae Booker, but I think there's more question marks about the Giants' depth chart than some of those other teams. So I'm going to put Dallas number 1. And then I think it's more interesting about Washington versus Philadelphia. And to me right now, John, I'm putting the Giants in 4th because I think there's some question marks about what those guys could do behind Saquon, assuming they ask them to play a significant role.
Wow, that's strong. All right, I agree. I think Pollard puts Dallas over the top for number 1. I agree with you there. I think that's a good way to look at it. The question is, though, with Philadelphia, like Boston Scott's not even an every down back. They drafted Kenneth Gainwell. And Miles Sanders has so many injury issues, Lance. I have a hard time putting them ahead of the Giants.
They also brought in Kerryon Johnson, too, the former Lions running back. They got a number of guys.
No, they did. You're right. I see him there in the depth chart, too. And they have Jordan Howard, I think, still in their roster also. They're going with the
strength by committee
numbers, yes, strategy. Absolutely. I like Antonio Gibson. No one else really on that depth chart really gets me excited. McKissick's fine. Peyton Barber's okay. I would probably go Dallas, Giants, and then Philly and Washington I would probably put in a dead heat. If I made you choose between Philly and Washington, which group would you rather have?
I'll go Washington number 2 in my book.
Okay.
I like Gibson. McKissick, I think, is extremely underrated. He actually had a really nice season.
No, he did.
So that guy has a tremendous amount of value in my book because he's also very good on third down and pass protection. And, Barber's another one of those guys. He's not a big name, but I just think those running backs fit very well into what Scott Turner wants to run. So I'll give you the fact that Philadelphia has some injury concern maybe, including Miles Sanders. So that's why Washington, to me, I'll put ahead of Philadelphia. And once again, I have nothing against Saquon Barkley. It's just he's coming off the torn ACL, significant injury, and then the guys behind him, there's potential, John, but I don't think there's enough proof compared to what the other teams have working behind their starters.
All right, so we do not have consensus on this. Do you want to just tie the three teams and put them all 2? Is that how you want to handle this? And then
well, when you compile these numbers, are you going to just take the average of how we all rank them? How exactly are you going to compute that?
What I'm doing, I'm taking our rankings together, and then I'm going to take Fiegel's and
okay.
Dottino
I thought you were
going to
do everybody on an individual basis.
I do not have that right now. I can, if you would like me to.
I think that may be the simple way to go about it, so you don't have to worry about the 2 of our numbers coming together.
All right, that's actually a pretty good
That just
one.
may be easy from a mathematics standpoint.
Okay, so we just happen to be in agreement on the corpus. I can do that. That's fine. Okay, so I'm going to put the Giants number 2 here for running back, and you said Washington as your number 2, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and you're putting
Philly 3, Giants 4.
Yes, Philly 3 and Giants 4.
And remember, another thing that I just want to add as you write these numbers down, Wayne Gallman, who had a very nice season, he's no longer in the picture. If Wayne Gallman's still here, John, I think my mindset changes because at least I know what I'm having out of Wayne Gallman. You've completely changed that to Devontae Booker, who has been a change-of-pace running back for the bulk of his career, and Corey Clement was also a change-of-pace guy on the back end of the Philadelphia depth chart. I haven't seen enough of them in a role where they're the definitive backup to know what they could do, or in the event that you had to give them a starting job, what they could do. I have a little better idea in terms of the other teams, and once again, telling you my rationale is depth chart, not just the starter. I'm compiling everything together.
Yep, I got you. All right, let's go to wide receiver here. As great as the Giants' additions in their wide receiver cores, I think this is actually one of the easier groups to kind of hash out here, to be totally honest with you. I think Dallas with Gallup, Cooper, and Lamb is clearly number 1.
Hard to top that.
Right? And frankly, I think the Giants are number 2 with the addition of Galladay, throw in Tony, throw in Sterling Shepard, throw in Darius Slayton. I really like Terry McLaurin. I think Curtis Samuel's a solid number 2, but I don't really, De'Ami Brown, I guess, could be their number 3. Maybe Steven Sims, Adam Humphries.
Cam Sims is another guy they have in the mix.
Another guy. They have a lot of numbers there. And then Philadelphia has a lot of young guys. Devontae Smith, Jalen Reagor that we have a lot of questions about.
And injury concerns, too,
yes,
Philadelphia has.
I agree.
Yeah.
So I would go Cowboys number 1, rather. Giants number 2. I would go Washington number 3, and I would go Philly number 4 in this exercise for me.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with you there. I think Washington is one of those interesting situations because I really like the addition of Curtis Samuel, and some of the guys behind those two have flashed. Maybe we haven't seen it enough consistently, so that's why the Giants get the edge over Washington, because when you go towards the back end, I think the Giants have a little bit more proven talent. But Washington's one of those teams to just watch out for this season because sometimes names, you can overlook production or upside, and I do like what their receiving core is composed of and what Scott Turner could tap into, but I'm in agreement in terms of those 4 rankings.
Perfect. All right, let's go to tight end here. And Lance, frankly, I'm going to assume Zach Ertz is not playing for the Eagles this year because that he seems to just say, he's saying I'm not playing for the Eagles, right? So I have to take a notch off for that. Otherwise, the Ertz-Goddard combination, I think, would be number 1.
Plus, they have Richard Rodgers, I believe, still on the roster, too, who's filled in nicely.
They do, but I frankly really like the Giants' combinations of tight ends. I think I'm going to put them number 1 with Kyle Rudolph and Evan Ingram. I don't think any other team has that combination of players at tight ends that the Giants do. So I think I have to put them at number 1. Number 2 with Goddard. Here's the thing. I really like Logan Thomas. He had a very underrated year last year for Washington.
Oh, yeah.
I think he was tremendous. Goddard is good, and they also have Rodgers. Ertz is still there. I'm going to still put Philly at number 2 here just because, Goddard's there. Ertz is on the roster. Richard Rodgers is pretty good. Washington, I don't feel great about who their second tight end is after Logan Thomas. So I'll give the edge to the Eagles on that. So I'm going to go Giants 1, Eagles 2, Washington 3, and then Dallas 4th for tight ends.
I agree with you on the first two. I have Giants 1. I think they have more proven depth. Philadelphia, listen, until Ertz is moved, John, I'm considering him part of the team. So he's under contract. I mean, he could threaten all he wants, but the bottom line is he's under contract, and I really like Goddard and Richard Rodgers, so I'll give them the edge. I have Dallas 3 because Blake Jarwin I know is coming off the ACL, but Jarwin previously has proven to be a very dynamic tight end. And Dalton Schultz, made some plays for them last season.
He was solid. He was solid.
Yeah, so they have some guys with experience. I'm with you. After Logan Thomas, and I really like Logan Thomas. I mean, kudos to him for just absolutely redefining himself after he was a quarterback in the NFL and now becoming, a really big-time target in that Washington offense. But if Thomas, God forbid, gets hurt, boy, I mean, Washington really has to dig deep to see what they have, at least from a receiving standpoint. Some of those guys are really good blockers. You just don't know if they could go out, run routes, and be a threat in the passing game. So I'm going to put Dallas ahead of Washington in terms of my rankings.
Fair enough. All right, let's go to the offensive line here, Lance. And look, I realize they have some injury concerns, but if you look at pure talent here, I think it's hard not to rank the Cowboys the top offensive line in the division at this point. Tyron Smith and La'el Collins, who were both out for the majority of last year, were active in OTAs. It looks like they're going to be back. Zach Martin's still one of the best guards in football. Left guard Connor Williams is the 4th year as a starter.
Started all 16 games last year.
It's only one. And then at center, they have the combination of Tyler Biadasz, Connor McGovern, trying to figure out what they're going to do at center. But I have a hard time ranking another team ahead of Dallas. To me, they're a pretty easy number 1 here. And despite the fact Philadelphia has some injuries and some moving parts, they still have Jason Kelsey. They still have Brandon Brooks. They still have Lane Johnson. Andre Dillard was a first-round pick. Isaac Seumalo's not a Pro Bowl or an All-Pro guy, but he's a solid starter. I still have to go Cowboys 1 and Eagles 2 here. And then I think it gets interesting between the Giants and Washington.
Yeah, I'm with you. Both of the teams, Dallas and Philadelphia, the common theme is they have guys returning from injury. So you really can't look at last year because there were a lot of guys out of the lineup. So I think it's a good way to describe the reinforcements that are coming aboard in this division. So I do like Dallas 1. I like Philadelphia 2. Washington is one of those teams that also brought in reinforcements, but those guys weren't previously on the team. So, for example, Charles Leno Jr. comes over from the Bears. Eric Flowers was there 2 years ago. Then he went to Miami. Now he's back. I do think Flowers has played much better as a guard, so you can't dismiss that. Cornelius Lucas is probably their biggest question mark at right tackle, and Brandon Sheriff and Chase Roulier have been pretty much staples at right guard and center, respectively. The Giants, well, you got youth and you got development on this offensive line. And I'd say you've got more youth and development than Washington. So if I'm going to weigh experience, John, and I'm going to weigh guys playing together with one another, I think you got to give the edge to Washington over the Giants in this case.
Yeah, and they have Brandon Sheriff, who is a sure thing, right?
Yeah.
And say what you want about Eric Flowers, he has been a fairly effective guard in the league. Leno's been a starting tackle for a long time. I think the Giants line actually probably has more upside than the Washington line. But I think Washington's probably the safer choice here. I could see it going both ways, but I agree. I think we can give the edge to Washington here just because they have guys that have shown that they can do it in the league.
Yeah, they have guys that have started for multiple seasons in the NFL, and we don't know what's going to happen at right tackle. Okay, Matt Peart barely had a lot of snaps last season. Okay, Andrew Thomas is entering year 2. Shane Lemieux entering year 2. Hernandez, does he switch positions, John? Does he go from left side to right side? Does he return to the left? And Nick Gates is still a relatively young center. So there's a lot more youth and inexperience on the Giants' offensive line compared to Washington. Whether or not upside plays out in favor of the Giants, I don't think is necessarily what we're debating. I think when you rank these positional groups, you have to go with also what you've seen and what you believe these guys could do. The Giants, by the end of this season, we could be looking at this offensive line differently. But right now, I still think there's more of an unknown.
I agree. All right, so just the offensive numbers here before we jump over to defense, Lance. We have the Cowboys. I have them with 17 points. You have them with 18. We both have the Giants in second place. I have them with 14 points. You have them with 12. Third place, you rather have the Eagles with 10 points, and I have Washington and the Eagles both tied with 9.5. So we have to tie. We actually are both tied here for third place. Washington and Philadelphia, you with 10 total points, me with 9.5. I had one tie in there. So, so that's where we're at now. And frankly, knowing how well the Giants defense played, the fact the Giants are pretty comfortably in second place with their offensive rankings here. I think that bodes pretty well for them as we head into the defensive side of the ball here.
Sure, yeah, especially since we have not talked about the secondary and even, some of the options perhaps in the pass rushing game. That's fair.
All right, let's go to the defensive side of the ball, folks. Just to keep the position groups equal, I wanted to try to do 5 categories on each side of the ball here. So I split it up: defensive line, which is primarily your interior guys, right? Or if you're a 3-4, your 3-man down line, otherwise 4-3, your 2 defensive tackles. Then I have edge rusher as a category, inside linebacker, which are your, inside linebackers / off-ball linebackers. If you're in the 4-3, like your will linebacker would be in this category, right? Cornerback and safety. So those are the 5 defensive categories I have here. Lance, let's start on the interior on the defensive line. The one thing I know for sure here, and then I'll let you lead off, I know I'm ranking the Cowboys last in terms of defensive tackles. Other than that, an interior defensive line, you have 3 pretty darn talented groups of interior defensive linemen here with Philadelphia, the Giants, and Washington.
Yeah, Washington, I know we're only talking about the interior guys, but Washington as a unit probably has the strongest unit. They drafted all these guys in the first round.
Yeah, no, by the way,
Daron
Payne, Jonathan Allen, and Matt Ioannidis are nothing to sneeze at either, just as interior guys. They're darn good.
100%. Plus, remember, Ioannidis was hurt last season. People forget about him.
Yeah.
He didn't play because he got hurt
and
very early in the year. So now
player.
He's coming back. Very similar to how we talked about the offensive line. You can't forget about the guys that have some proven talent that are returning. And then, of course, you have Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen. Philadelphia, the guys are getting a little bit up there in age. I certainly like Fletcher Cox. Hargrave is the solid guy that they added from the Steelers. They drafted Milton Williams, who I think is an extremely intriguing pick. But I think when you add the experience, the upside, I would give Washington the edge over Philadelphia. So Washington would be number 1. Philadelphia would be number 2. The Giants would be 3. And then Dallas probably has the most question marks, so therefore they're 4.
Interesting. See, I think I would probably put Philly because of their age, and I don't think they had the depth that they once had inside. So I'm going to put them in 3rd. I'm going to put Washington 1 because of Payne and Allen. I'm going to put the Giants at number 2 because I think Leonard Williams and Dexter Lawrence, I think they compare pretty favorably to, Fletcher Cox and Javon Hargrave. You know what I mean?
They do. I look at the fact that, once again, Leonard Williams, 11.5 sacks for the first time in his career. Can he do that again? Fletcher Cox, Hargrave. I've seen what those guys could do over a variety of seasons. So I'm a little bit more sold that I know what I'm getting out of Philly's veterans compared to the Giants. So that's why I gave Philadelphia the edge over New York.
Okay, so you're giving Philly 2nd place, Washington 1st place, Dallas in last, and you did the Giants in 3rd. Okay, perfect. All right, let's go to the edge rusher spot here. And look, I think it's hard to argue that anyone but Washington here is number 1. I like Brandon Graham and Derek Barnett, Lance, and Ryan Kerrigan's there too, and Josh Sweat's good. But Chase Young and Montez Sweat, I know there's not as much depth behind those 2 guys, but they're young, they're in their prime, they're dynamic, and they're so good. I think Brandon Graham at some point is probably going to fall off a little bit. I think I got to put Washington number 1 here at edge rusher.
See, I'm going to go the opposite of you because of the rationale you use for the interior lineman. I'm going to go Washington ahead of Philly, ahead of Washington because I'm considering the depth here. I'm concerned about Chase Young and Montez Sweat, who's behind them, John. That's my concern. Whereas at Philadelphia, I'll add another name that you didn't mention. They have Josh Sweat, who was a 4th-round pick in 2018, who has shown some really nice flashes and has, I think, earned a spot in the rotation. So you could argue with the addition of Kerrigan and obviously Barnett, Brandon Graham, and Sweat, they really have 4 guys that they could rotate on the edge. Washington doesn't have as many based on the numbers game. So Philadelphia, to me, is 1. Washington's 2.
And then I think I had to put Dallas 3 because I think DeMarcus Lawrence is just head and shoulders above anyone the Giants have coming off the edge. Randy Gregory, is coming off a comeback year, coming off all those suspensions. He seems to kind of have his life together a little bit, which is good to see. So to me, and by the way, we never talked about the Dallas interior guys who just, Carlos Watkins, I think people be like, who's that? Tristan Hill coming off injury, then just a couple of draft picks. Neville Gallimore, a draft pick from last year. So I think there are a lot of questions there on the Dallas front, but DeMarcus Lawrence's presence at end, throw on Randy Gregory. I would put Dallas 3rd in this group, and then with the Giants, we talked about their edge rusher class. I like Azeez Ojulari a lot. Lorenzo Carter's coming off an Achilles. A lot of guys that I think can do it, but haven't proven they can do it. So I think I got to go Dallas 3rd here and the Giants at 4th.
Well, and here's the other thing I'd add. DeMarcus Lawrence is better than anyone you'd put up against him from the Giants.
Oh, and it's not close.
Yeah, so, I mean, that gives Dallas a significant advantage over the Giants. I mean, you could tell me that the Giants have more volume if somebody wanted to make that argument because they have some intriguing options. But even with the volume, DeMarcus Lawrence is still by far the best pass rusher compared to anybody who can make an argument with the Giants. So I think that alone is the reason why Dallas belongs in the third spot.
All right, let's take a look at inside linebacker here, and this is going to be different, or this, again, inside linebacker / off-ball linebacker here. So for the Giants, they're only going to have two guys in this list because they're kind of in their 3-4 with the two inside linebackers, which is the combination of Blake Martinez, Reggie Ragland, Tay Crowder. You know, maybe you want to include Carter Coughlin in there in that group, you can. The Cowboys just decided to invest incredibly in their inside linebacker core with high draft picks. So they have Jalen Smith, Micah Parsons, Leighton Vander Esch, and Jabril Cox. So that's just a plethora of guys in the middle there. Philadelphia, this is a spot they have never really invested a ton in. TJ Edwards, Jannard Avery, Alex Singleton, their linebackers. And then Washington's going to throw out there Cole Holcomb, John Bostic. They drafted Jamin Davis in the first round this year. So, Lance, I think I got to give Dallas the edge here in terms of off-ball inside linebackers. I would rank them my top group. After that, since no other team has a player as good as Blake Martinez, I have trouble ranking Philadelphia or Washington ahead of the Giants in this situation, just because of what Blake Martinez can do. So I think I would put the Giants second here. Jamin Davis is a very good high draft pick, and the Eagles just haven't really invested in that spot. So I'll put Washington third and Philadelphia fourth for me.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with your rankings. I like Washington's group. Holcomb was hurt for most of last season, so unfortunately he didn't get as much time as he would have hoped. John Bostic's been a journeyman, a solid veteran linebacker, and they have the upside with Davis, the rookie. But I don't think they have a Blake Martinez, so therefore the Giants would go ahead of Washington. And Philadelphia, once again, has some young guys with some veterans. I just don't look at them as having a dynamic playmaker at that second level compared to what at least Washington has to offer. So that, to me, is why I think Philadelphia belongs in the fourth and final spot there.
I agree. All right, let's go to the cornerback spot, Lance. We have agreement on most of these defensive spots, honestly. And look, I think at cornerback, let's start with the Giants. James Bradbury, Adoree Jackson, a couple of young guys inside, and Darnay Holmes and Aaron Robinson. Then we know the other names that are behind them. Dallas have invested a lot in the cornerback position, but there's, much like with the Giants, we talk about their offensive line, right? It's kind of the same deal with the Cowboys secondary. They got a bunch of young guys that they've invested in, but we don't really know what they are yet. Kelvin Joseph, second-round pick. Trayvon Diggs, second-round pick. Jordan Lewis, I think he just got a second contract. Anthony Brown, these are names you know. Reggie Robinson was a draft pick last year. They think they're moving him to safety. Nashawn Wright was a draft pick this year. So they have a lot of young guys at corner, which is a really dangerous game to play. Washington is throwing out William Jackson, Kendall Fuller, Jimmy Moreland, which is a really nice group, I think 1 through 3. And then Philly with Darius Slay, Avonte Maddox, and then throw in some of their guys inside that are a little bit younger. So for me, Lance, I think I'm going Giants 1 here. I think I'm going Washington number 2. I think I have to go Philadelphia number 3, and I think I'm going Dallas number 4.
Yeah, I'm with you with the Giants number 1. I'll give Washington the edge over the other teams because I think Kendall Fuller, adding him back in the mix, and William Jackson, the solid veteran from the Cincinnati Bengals, gives them a little bit more proven commodity to work with. See, Dallas has some intrigue because of their young guys, and Trayvon Diggs and Jordan Lewis have been in the NFL for at least one season. Lewis has been in the league a little bit more than Diggs, but on the opposite side, that's more of maybe the nickel and one side corner. The opposite side, you're probably going to start a young guy, whereas Philadelphia, Darius Slay is by far the best corner out of anybody else that you could compare to. And Avonte Maddox has been in the league, and he's mixed inside and outside. So I'd give Philadelphia 3 and Dallas 4 under those circumstances.
I agree. Okay, let's go to safety. One number that's pretty easy for the safety class, I think Dallas goes into the last spot because, frankly, we don't even know who their 2 starters are going to be. When I say it's an open competition, Lance, it's an open competition. Donovan Wilson is the only returning starter at that spot. And then who the heck knows who the other starting safety for Dallas is.
Well, it could be DeMonte Casey, who they added, former Falcon, who was with Dan Quinn, remember?
Coming off an Achilles injury, too.
Sure.
So we'll have to see what they do there. But, yeah, I think he'd probably be the guy I pencil in, too. I agree with that. You look at Washington, Landon Collins coming off an injury, Cameron Curl with him. Philadelphia, Marcus Epps and Anthony Harris. Of course, the Rodney McLeod's there, too. But, the Malcolm Jenkins era there is over. And then the Giants, who are rolling out their, numbers of safeties with Peppers, Logan Ryan, Xavier McKinley, Julian Love. So I think Dallas is easily last, in my opinion. The Giants are easily first, in my opinion. And then I would probably put the Eagles number 2 because Anthony Harris is a darn good player. And then I probably put Washington number 3.
Yeah, I think Rodney, I combined two safeties there. Anthony Harris, was a really nice ad for them from Minnesota, and I was going to reference Rodney McLeod because, that's another proven veteran. The problem is he's been a little bit injury-plagued, but you still have him there. So Philadelphia, to me, deserves to get the number 2 spot. Washington would be 3 because of the presence of Landon Collins. And Cameron Curl is somewhat of an underrated player. And then I would go with, obviously, the Dallas Cowboys, mainly because you don't know who's the other starter. And you just wonder who could emerge. So, whenever you have a bunch of young guys on a roster, that unit could turn out to be solid, depending on what Dan Quinn does. He's a very good defensive coordinator. It's just, you got to see it before we can at least crown them in that regard.
All right, so I'm just doing my composite rankings here very quickly, Lance. 5, 6, 11, and then that is ranked at 7, 8, 13. Okay, so taking a quick look here, Lance, as we take a look at these rankings for the defensive side of the ball. Washington and the Giants are basically tied in our composite rankings. I give the Giants 15, and I give Washington 15. You give the Giants 14. You give Washington 14 points here. So we have them tied in terms of where we stand. You have the Eagles with 13 points. I have them with just 11 points. So you think they're a little bit better than I do. Then the Cowboys in last place at 9. So Giants and Washington tied for defense. Eagles coming up in 3rd, and then Cowboys lagging way behind with just 9 points out of those 5 positions. All right, let's do coaching and special teams here, Lance. Look, I think you got to tip the cap, and no one has said better things about Joe Judge than I have, but I think Ron Rivera has a pretty strong track record here, and the way he turned that team around last year, I have to give him the nod. I would put Joe Judge, in my opinion, number 2 in this list. I would put McCarthy number 3. And then I would put Philadelphia with Sirianni. We don't know exactly what he is yet. I would put the Philadelphia Eagles last at number 1.
Yeah, I think Washington deserves to be at the top. Plus, now, are we just looking at head coach, or are we looking at the entire coaching staff here?
You can go to staff. You can do staff.
Because, Jack Del Rio is their defensive coordinator who's been a head coach, and I think he did a really nice job with that defense, considering they had about 17 different quarterbacks who felt as if they were out there at some point. So I'm not overlooking that. And I think Scott Turner has done a really nice job on the offensive side of the ball. So really, when you look at the depth of the Washington staff, I think that enhances the argument for Ron Rivera. As far as number 2, you could go really either way here because Dallas now has Dan Quinn, another proven head coach who did really nice as the defensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks. Kellen Moore has been established as the offensive coordinator for the last few years. I mean, I know the Giants have Jason Garrett and Patrick Graham, but, Mike McCarthy has a lot more experience than Joe Judge. So if we're going to stay consistent, I'm going to go Dallas 2 with the Giants 3, and then I'll put Philadelphia 4 because that really is the complete unknown. You don't have a lot of head coaching experience behind Sirianni, and Sirianni's never been a head coach.
All right, let's go to special teams here, Lance, as we wrap this up. Then we'll look at our total numbers here. Special teams are tough from team to team here. There are a lot of questions for a lot of these teams. The Giants are returning most of their guys, and I think they have a real nice group of return men that they can choose from in terms of their return game, which I think you like. Jake Elliott returns for Philadelphia. Dallas, they're bringing back Legatron and Greg Zierlein. They're changing their punter this year. So I think, and you throw on special teams coaching here a little bit too, I think I would have to rank the Giants number 1 here in terms of special teams. I feel the best about their field goal kicker, and I probably feel the best about their return game as well. How would you rank it after that? I'm still trying to sort this out in my head here.
Yeah, well, I was going to say you could really also make somewhat of an argument for Washington. I mean, Washington has Tress Way, who's one of the best punters.
No, he does.
Dustin Hopkins, okay, maybe he's not what the Giants have, but he's been a veteran, solid kicker. I think he could do a lot worse. As far as their return man, Antonio Gibson's one of their return guys. Maybe there's a question mark about who do they have as the punt returner this year. That's fair, but I would make a strong case for that. And then remember, Dallas, John's got CeeDee Lamb and Tony Pollard as their return guys. Zerline has a very strong leg. And, John Fossil is a very strong special teams coach, too, who's had a very strong track record of creativity and coaching guys up. So, to me, you could really make a case for three of those teams, I would argue.
No, I think that's fair.
To be number one. It's really like pulling hairs here in terms of, who you're going to give the significant advantage to. If you want to look at the Giants and you want to talk about multiple options for return men, they probably have the depth that other teams don't. Graham Gano was money, and Riley Dixon is trying to come back from somewhat of a down year compared to his previous year. I mean, I'll give the Giants the slight edge, but it is very slight, John, in that category. I think you could easily make a case for some of these other teams. I'll go Dallas 2. I'll go Washington 3. I'll go Philadelphia 4.
That's how I ended up ranking it, too. I'm with you. All right, so let me do composite numbers here very quickly. Let me do some quick math in my head. 26, 31, 18, 17, 27, 33. Washington, for me, 30 and a half. For you, 24, that's 30. And then Philadelphia, 11, 20 and a half, 22 and a half, 23, 25. All right, so here we go. Total numbers. Are you ready, Lance?
I'm ready.
All right, for me, the Giants came out number 1 at 36 off the strength of their defense, coaching, and special teams. Dallas came in second at 31. Third place was Washington at 30 and a half. And then Philadelphia was last at 22 and a half. You have the Cowboys at 33. The Giants right behind them at 32. Washington right behind them at 30. And then Philadelphia picking up the rear at 25. So, and again, I tried to find the numbers from the last 2 years on our rankings. I couldn't track them down. I really tried. I just couldn't find them. And we saw the gap narrowing in these rankings. Like, we did this 3 years ago, and the Giants were right with Washington at the bottom. Last year, the Giants were in third place, but they were much closer to Philly and Dallas 1-2 than they were Washington fourth. Shows what the heck we're talking about, given how the standings turned out. And then this year, you see the Giants pushing right here in that top tier with Dallas. So I think we are seeing the talent, Lance, on the team improving, and it's showing in just how these, rankings are coming out with the way we're doing them.
Well, and I also think it has to do a little bit with what the defense showed last season, which wasn't necessarily a highly ranked unit coming in, but some of the free agents they added did a really nice job, specifically Blake Martinez and James Bradbury. And this was an offseason where the Giants focused a little bit more on the offensive side of the ball, where they've brought in some proven talent and some young guys. So I think if you look at the additions on the roster, it's hard to argue that the Giants haven't improved. The question is, as I've argued more often than not, it's one thing to show me a team, John, on paper. It's another thing to show me what a team can actually do on the field. Those are two different things. And I think the division outcome last season proved that, because we were talking about Philadelphia would have a significant advantage with continuity on the coaching staff, and, that didn't necessarily turn out to be the case. Now, granted, Philadelphia and Dallas were plagued by injuries last year. If you would have told me that, I would have obviously had a little bit more to work with, and I would have said, yeah, that's probably going to impact the outlook of those teams. And Washington was probably the most pleasant surprise because you had a lot of newness across the board, and you tell most teams you're not going to have one quarterback. You're going to have four quarterbacks. They're going to start at least one game. They'd probably tell you, yeah, you're not talking playoffs that year. So Washington, once again, emerged because I think the influence of the coaching staff and some of the younger talent that made an impact. So I think the point at hand here, John, is, and I'm actually glad that the rankings, at least from how I finished it, are neck and neck, because I really see the division in a similar way. I think that there's a very tight affair going on. I don't think there's a juggernaut in this division. I don't think there's a runaway team. And I think there's some depth in this division where you could make a case that multiple teams have a legitimate shot.
And here's how I look at it before we get to the calls. there are different positions on each of these teams when I look at their groups that I say, all right, these are going to be the groups that are going to determine how this season goes. For the Giants, it's the quarterback position and it's the offensive line, right? If they outperform, the numbers that we have for them, specifically the offensive line, and throw an edge rusher on defense, that can make the Giants really good because we have all their other units ranked high. We have the quarterback ranked high too, but still, we did that based a little bit on thinking he might improve a little bit. For Dallas, it's the secondary. They were ranked last at cornerback and safety. We talked about this with the Giants the last few years, right? It's hard to be a good team if your defensive backfield stinks. If their defensive backfield can be just okay, then it opens the door for them to win the division. Can that happen? We'll see. For Washington, it's the quarterback position, and really it's the offense in general. Can they get enough out of this offense, to get the points on the board where their defensive line, which is where their strength is, can really go after the quarterback? And then Philadelphia, can they score enough points? We have their quarterback, running back, and wide receiver positions, Lance, all ranked worst or next to last. It's hard to win that way. So can those young groups, and Philly's wide receiver core is young, their quarterback's a second-year player, can that group put it all together and score enough points for Philadelphia? So to me, those are the tipping points for each one of these teams that could propel any of them into being a division champion or potentially finishing in last place.
Well, it's funny when you broke down the defenses for the Giants and the Cowboys, I look at them as opposites, and what I mean by that is I think Dallas is going to look to the front seven to help maybe shorten the gap with respect to the secondary. Because, remember, they struggled against the run last season, too.
They struggled against everything.
Well, but specifically, there were games where they
sure.
just could not stop the ground game. So I think they're saying to themselves, with an improvement at the linebacker position and knowing that we have some decent guys off the edge, if we get pressure on the quarterback, we stop the run, it takes pressure off of the secondary. Then I think the Giants are of the mindset, we like our secondary. If we could cover well, then we'll help the guys up front get to the quarterback because they'll have a little bit more time. So, once again, I look at those groups as opposite. They have question marks, but it's the flip. It's the reverse. So, that could be somewhat of an X factor to monitor. And the other thing that I'll add to your points about Philadelphia is, can Nick Sirianni and that coaching staff benefit from the land of the unknown? And what I mean by that is the fact that you don't know what this Philadelphia team's going to look like. We don't know what the defense identity is going to be. We don't know what they're going to run on offense. Remember, that benefited a team like Washington because you really didn't know what Ron Rivera was going to do. Is he going to duplicate Carolina? Are they going to do something different outside the box? So sometimes that could work in your favor, and that could shorten the gap, as I referenced earlier with the Dallas Cowboys. So that's something to watch out. That could be the one edge that Philadelphia can hang its hat on that these other teams can't, because now the Giants, the Cowboys, and Washington, they're bringing back what they established last season. Philadelphia has that newness. Maybe that all of a sudden works in their favor to some capacity.
We'll see. It'll be interesting. And again, I'll pop on with Jeff and Paul tomorrow, and we can do the second half of our rankings here for them. We'll see where they're come up with. Can Paul break like the 40-point barrier for the Giants? We know he's going to try. Can he do it? We'll find out tomorrow on Big Blue Kickoff 5. All right,